In 1424, an army of 15,000 soldiers marched to what they believed was certain victory. They outnumbered their enemy, possessed elite knights, and had a specific plan to counter the single weapon that had destroyed them 9 years earlier. But just hours later, their army was annihilated. This is the story of how a fatal assumption led to a battle so bloody it was called the Second Agincourt. To truly grasp the monumental stakes of this moment, we have to understand the fragile world it took place in. Just a few years earlier, the English king, Henry V, had achieved the impossible at the Battle of Agincourt. His small army had annihilated the flower of French chivalry, a victory so complete it felt like divine judgment. In the years that followed, Henry didn't just win a battle, he methodically conquered Normandy and brought France to its knees, forcing the French king to name him as his heir. He stood at the pinnacle of power, a warrior king who had redrawn the map of Europe. But kings are mortal. In 1422, at the height of his glory, Henry V died of dysentery, leaving his vast conquests in the hands of his only heir, his 9-month-old son, Henry VI. The death of a lion throws the entire kingdom into question. A baby could not rule, and the spectre of a military genius was replaced by the uncertainty of a regency. The man tasked with holding this fragile empire together in France was the late king's brother, John, Duke of Bedford. He was a capable administrator and a skilled general, but he was not Henry V. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the English was gone. For the French, this was a resurrection. Their heir, the Dauphin Charles, saw his chance to reclaim his kingdom, and French resistance began to stir once more, and they were not alone. From across the sea came their oldest allies, the Scots. Thousands of elite Scottish soldiers, led by powerful nobles like Archibald Douglas and the Earl of Buchan, had crossed the Channel to fight for the French cause. These were some of the finest professional soldiers in Europe, battle-hardened and carrying a burning hatred for the English. Their arrival had transformed the French army, giving it a disciplined, steel core it had lacked since Agincourt. This new Franco-Scottish force was confident, powerful, and eager to prove that the age of English dominance was over. They had already handed the English a stinging defeat a few years earlier at the Battle of Bourges, a victory that proved the lions of Agincourt could bleed. Now, in the summer of 1424, this reborn army had its sights set on a critical target, the fortress of Ivry in southern Normandy. They laid siege to the castle, and its English commander, knowing he was hopelessly outmatched, made a pact. He swore he would surrender if an English relief army did not arrive to save him by August 15th. It was a formal, chivalric challenge. The message was clear: abandon your holdings and show your weakness, or march your army to meet us in open battle. For Bedford, there was no choice. To lose Ivry would be a devastating blow to English prestige. A collision was now inevitable. The jaws of the trap were closing. An army is only as strong as the man who leads it. Marching to relieve Ivry is John, Duke of Bedford, a man burdened by the immense legacy of his dead brother. Against him are nobles who see victory not as a strategic objective, but as a glorious birthright they are owed. Bedford was everything a medieval warrior aristocrat was expected to be, but beneath the surface was a mind of cold, calculating pragmatism. He had been forged in the crucible of his brother's wars, learning strategy from the grim reality of the battlefield. For Bedford, victory was not an abstract concept of honor, it was a matter of survival. The English presence in France rested squarely on his shoulders, and he knew that one mistake could see it all turn to ash. Facing him was a command structure born of alliance and ambition. The Franco-Scottish army was led by a council of powerful nobles, a dangerous cocktail of pride and rivalry. The preeminent figures, Archibald Douglas and the French Duke of Alençon, represented a resurgent chivalry, proud and contemptuous of the English yeomen who had humbled them. This overconfidence was their greatest weakness. They saw Bedford's smaller army and remembered Bourges, not Agincourt. They believed their superior numbers, especially their thousands of heavily armored men-at-arms, made victory a foregone conclusion. They had even hired a contingent of Lombard mercenary cavalry with one specific purpose: to ride down and slaughter the English longbowmen, the hated architects of their previous defeats. Their plan was simple, arrogant, and brutally direct, a massive, head-on assault. It was a strategy born of pride, a belief that noble blood and heavy armor were inherently superior to the discipline of common soldiers. They had learned nothing. If you are finding this story of leadership and legacy compelling, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you never miss a tale of history's greatest conflicts. We have so many more stories of incredible battles to share, and we would love for you to join our community of history enthusiasts. When Bedford's army arrived at Ivry on August 14th, they found the fortress abandoned. The Franco-Scottish commanders, hearing of his approach, had broken off their siege, hoping to find a more favorable battlefield. Bedford had fulfilled his obligation. He could have declared victory and marched back to safety. But he knew this was no victory. The Allied army was still in the field, a dagger aimed at his territory. Following his brother's aggressive philosophy, Bedford made a fateful decision. He would pursue them. He would force the battle they so clearly wanted. The hunt was on, but by chasing them, Bedford was walking straight into a trap the Allies had designed specifically to counter his greatest weapon. As the two armies approached the town of Verneuil, the difference between them becomes terrifyingly clear. One is a sea of aristocratic banners and heavy steel, a magnificent spectacle of chivalry. The other is a smaller, quieter force of hardened professionals, an army not of nobles, but of yeomen carrying the single deadliest weapon on the medieval battlefield. Bedford's army numbered around 9,000 men. About a third were men-at-arms, the armored soldiers who would form his center. But the true strength of his army was its contingent of around 5,000 longbowmen. A lifetime of training had turned their bodies into living weapons. The yew longbow was a fearsome piece of engineering, standing 6 feet tall with a draw weight of well over 100 pounds. An army of 5,000 archers could rain down 60,000 arrows in a single minute, a terrifying, flesh-shredding storm of death that could break the charge of the most courageous knights. The Franco-Scottish commanders knew this, and they had hired a secret weapon of their own to make sure that storm never began. But Bedford knew the archers were vulnerable. He relied on a tactic perfected by his brother, defense in depth. He ordered his men to prepare sharpened stakes, 6-foot lengths of oak pointed at both ends, to be hammered into the ground to create a deadly, makeshift hedge. And to protect his flanks and his crucial baggage train, he devised a brilliant formation. He would park the wagons in a single, fortified laager at the rear, guarded by a dedicated force of archers. The army itself would fight on foot, a solid block of men-at-arms in the center with 2 large wings of archers on either side, their lines protected by the sharpened stakes. The Franco-Scottish army was a far grander sight. Numbering around 15,000 men, its core was a massive body of about 8,000 heavily armored men-at-arms. This was the hammer they intended to use to smash the English line. Their Scottish contingent was particularly renowned for its ferocity in the charge. Backing them up was their secret weapon, a force of about 600 Lombard heavy cavalry, mercenaries hired for the specific task of neutralizing the English archers. Their plan was for the Lombards to thunder around the English flank while the main body of men-at-arms advanced, smashing into the vulnerable archers from the side and rear. The psychology of the two armies could not have been more different. The English were grim and silent, outnumbered and fighting for their lives. Across the field, the Allied camp was a riot of noise and color. They saw a smaller army of commoners and felt a familiar chivalric disdain. The memory of their victory at Beaujeu had erased the trauma of Agincourt. An old Scottish knight, surveying the English lines, is said to have remarked that he would fight them even if they had 10 times the men. It was a spirit of defiant bravery that would soon lead them to their doom. The two armies stand arrayed under the hot August sun, separated by a field of grass and dirt. For an hour, neither side moves, a silent, brutal standoff. Then, a roar goes up from the English lines as they advance in perfect order, planting their stakes and daring the enemy to charge. For one agonizing hour, 15,000 men stared at 9,000, waiting. But the side that moved first would not be the one you think. Bedford knew that waiting favored the larger army. He had to seize the initiative. In a move of incredible audacity, he gave the order to advance. His entire army moved slowly, deliberately, maintaining their perfect formation. They advanced to within bowshot range, halted, and the archers began hammering their stakes into the hard summer earth. The dare had been made. The Allied commanders could wait no longer. The Lombard cavalry spurred their horses, beginning their charge toward the English right flank. Simultaneously, the colossal central body of French and Scottish men-at-arms began its own advance, a slow-moving avalanche of polished steel. As they entered the effective range, the English archers drew their bowstrings. A command was shouted, and the sky went dark. The first volley, a storm of 5,000 arrows, rose in a high arc and plunged into the advancing ranks. The Lombard cavalry, however, managed to get around the stakes and crashed into one wing of the English archers. But they were met not with panicked peasants, but with hardened veterans who drew their own sidearms and fought back with vicious determination. At the same time, another French cavalry force attacked the English rear, not at the main battle line, but at the baggage laager. Here, the 2,000 archers left as guards unleashed hell, turning their glorious charge into a panicked rout. But in the center, the main event was just beginning. The massive Franco-Scottish infantry, having endured the punishing arrow storm, finally crashed into the English line of men-at-arms. The impact was cataclysmic. This was the fight the Scots had wanted: a savage, close-quarters melee. The English line, though outnumbered, held firm. For over 45 minutes, the two sides butchered each other in a horrific stalemate. The battle had become a monstrous meat grinder, and it hung precariously on a knife's edge. And just as the English line began to buckle, the battle was decided not by the knights in the center, but by the men nobody expected. Who do you think has the advantage at this point? The disciplined English defenders or the ferocious Franco-Scottish attackers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The center of the battle was a heaving mass of humanity. The Duke of Bedford himself was in the thick of it, fighting on foot among his men, his presence a bastion of courage. The sheer weight of the Allied numbers began to tell, and the English were slowly, bloodily, pushed back, but they did not break. Their discipline, forged over years of campaigning, held them together. They gave ground grudgingly, fighting with a desperate ferocity born of the knowledge that there was no retreat. The initial, furious momentum of their charge was waning, replaced by a grueling, savage attrition. For 2 agonizing hours, the center holds in this bloody stalemate. But on the flanks, something extraordinary is happening. The English archers, having shattered the cavalry charges and depleted their arrows, do not retreat. They do the unthinkable. Having repulsed the Lombard cavalry, and with their quivers running empty, the longbowmen faced a choice. What happened next was not part of any formal battle plan. It was a moment of brutal, spontaneous initiative that would define the battle. With a roar, the 5,000 English archers abandoned their bows, uprooted their protective stakes to use as crude clubs, and drew their swords, hatchets, and heavy mallets. Unencumbered by the heavy plate armor that was now weighing down the exhausted knights in the center, they were fast, fresh, and furious. They surged forward, not into the front of the melee, but around its flanks. They fell upon the sides and rear of the struggling Franco-Scottish men-at-arms like a pack of wolves. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Allied soldiers, locked in a desperate frontal struggle with the English infantry, were completely unprepared for a massive assault from their flanks. Suddenly, they were being attacked from 3 sides at once. The lightly armored archers swarmed among them, their heavy mallets crushing helmets, and their short swords finding the vulnerable gaps in armor at the neck and joints. The disciplined Franco-Scottish line, already exhausted from hours of fighting, dissolved into a series of desperate, swirling pockets of resistance. Panic set in. The Duke of Alençon was captured. The Earl of Douglas, the fearsome Tyneman, was cut down and killed. The Earl of Buchan, Constable of France, met the same fate. Leader after leader fell. The Scottish contingent, true to their fierce reputation, refused to retreat. They fought to the last man, dying where they stood, and were almost completely wiped out. Seeing their leaders fall and their lines collapsing, the French forces broke. The retreat turned into a full-scale, panicked rout. The English, sensing victory, surged forward, and the battle turned into a massacre. This is one of history's most brutal turning points, and if you know someone who loves an incredible underdog story, share this video with them. The aftermath was a scene of utter carnage. The field of Verneuil was a charnel house. The Franco-Scottish army was not just defeated, it was annihilated. Modern estimates place their losses at around 7,000 men, a catastrophic figure. In contrast, the English lost only around 1,600. It was a victory even more total and devastating than Agincourt. Bedford's smaller, disciplined army had, through superior tactics, utterly destroyed a larger, more confident, aristocratic force. The victory sent shockwaves across Europe. In England, it was hailed as a miracle. In France, it was a national disaster, crippling the Dauphin's cause and seemingly cementing the English hold on northern France for good. The battle immediately became known as the Second Agincourt, and for good reason. The parallels were undeniable. A smaller English army, through the devastating power of the longbow and the failure of an overconfident, aristocratic charge, had once again crushed a larger French host. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the entire 100 Years' War and secured the English regency for another quarter of a century, a final, brutal echo of the triumphs of Henry V. The battle is a testament that armies are not just collections of men, but systems of tactics, leadership, and discipline. At Verneuil, the pride of chivalry charged headlong into the cold, deadly professionalism of the English war machine and was utterly shattered. If you want to see more stories about the incredible battles that shaped our world, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And let us know in the comments what piece of history you think deserves to be told next.